The United Nations Hall shimmered with artificial light, its glass walls reflecting power and hypocrisy in equal measure. Leaders, diplomats, and cameras filled every corner. It wasn't an ordinary day. The session was called to address the growing African independence movement, a phrase that made Western officials uncomfortable. At the center of it all stood Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader from Burkina Faso who had become the voice of Africa's defiance. On the other side of the hall sat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, confident, sharp, and ready for confrontation. She had been briefed before the meeting: challenge him. Remind him who runs the global system. When Traoré approached the microphone, silence followed. His uniform gleamed under the lights, his gaze unwavering. For centuries, he began, we have been told to ask for permission to trade, to defend, to dream. But today, Africa does not ask. We act. The room murmured. Some clapped cautiously, others frowned. AOC leaned toward her microphone with a smirk. That's a nice speech, Captain, she said, her voice carrying the polished sarcasm of Washington politics. But speeches don't feed nations. You're just a soldier playing politician. What can you possibly know about building a country? The hall stiffened. Reporters froze. Even the translators hesitated before relaying her words. Traoré turned his head slowly toward her. For a long second, he said nothing. Then, he smiled. Calm, sharp, and deliberate. Madam, he said, his voice firm but not loud, you speak of building. Yet your nation built empires on the backs of others. You call me just a soldier, but at least I fight for my people. You just talk. A wave of murmurs rippled through the hall. Cameras clicked like gunfire. AOC's expression faltered, just for a heartbeat, before she composed herself again. But the energy had shifted. Traoré wasn't merely speaking, he was commanding. The room was his battlefield, and his words were weapons. Every diplomat could feel it, the balance of fear and fascination. A reporter whispered to another, he's not just a soldier, he's a storm. AOC tried to respond, but for the first time in her career, she couldn't find the words. The confrontation replayed across the world before the day was even over. Every news channel from Washington to Ouagadougou carried the clip, AOC leaning forward, mocking, you're just a soldier. And Traoré's quiet, devastating reply, you're just talk. By midnight, social media had turned the exchange into a digital wildfire. Hashtags flooded timelines, hashtag Traoré speaks, hashtag the soldier and the speaker, hashtag Africa rises. Millions of Africans, young and old, felt something stir inside them. It wasn't just pride, it was vindication. For decades, the West had spoken about Africa. Now Africa was speaking back. In the White House press room, officials scrambled to control the narrative. AOC's team released a statement saying her words were taken out of context. But the damage was done. Every meme, every edit, every soundbite painted the same image, a proud African leader humiliating a Western politician in her own arena. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, crowds filled the streets of Ouagadougou, waving flags, chanting Traoré's name. He spoke for all of us, shouted a young man on live television. They think we are just soldiers, just rebels, just poor, but he showed them we are alive. Inside the UN, the atmosphere was tense. Delegates whispered in the corridors, some angry, others secretly thrilled. Even Western representatives couldn't deny the power of that moment. In private, one European diplomat muttered, that young man just rewrote the rules of diplomacy. AOC, back in her New York office, watched the replay in silence. Her advisors urged her to strike back publicly, but she hesitated. Beneath her frustration, she felt something she hadn't expected: respect. Traoré's composure, his certainty, it wasn't arrogance. It was conviction. And conviction was something America's polished politicians had long forgotten. But while the world debated the words, Traoré was already moving on. In his hotel room overlooking the East River, he met with a small group of African delegates. They want to see us argue, he said calmly. But we will build. We will make them realize Africa is not a subject of history, it is its author. He stood by the window, the Manhattan skyline glowing behind him. Cameras had captured his defiance, but none could capture what was truly happening, the shift of power, quiet but unstoppable. The next morning, the UN hall was different. Gone was the smug stillness that had filled it before. Delegates arrived earlier than usual, whispering, eyes darting toward the seat where Ibrahim Traoré would soon sit. Even the American representatives, usually the loudest in the room, spoke in hushed tones. Overnight, a young African captain had shifted the world's center of gravity, and everyone felt it. When Traoré entered, conversations died instantly. No bodyguards, no grand entrance, just quiet steps and a look that commanded more authority than any title could. He nodded politely to a few diplomats before taking his seat. Across the room, AOC pretended not to notice him, though the tension between them was almost visible. The session began. A French ambassador tried to recover control of the narrative. With all due respect, he said, Africa still relies on Western investment. Words of rebellion may sound poetic, but development requires partnership, not defiance. A few delegates nodded, relieved someone had said it. But Traoré simply raised his hand, asking for the floor. The moderator hesitated, then granted it. He stood slowly, adjusting the microphone. Partnership, he repeated, his tone steady. That word is always used by those who profit most from it. The room fell into an almost sacred silence. You call it partnership when we mine the gold and you take the profits. You call it cooperation when our people starve and your banks grow. You call it democracy when your companies fund our coups. If this is partnership, perhaps we should consider independence. The hall erupted in murmurs. AOC looked up now, eyes wide. Even she couldn't deny the precision of his strike. Every sentence landed like a hammer, calm, factual, devastating. Traoré's eyes swept across the hall, meeting every gaze, daring anyone to contradict him. They told us to be patient. They said progress takes time. But while we waited, you built empires. Now we build for ourselves, not against you, but without you. Reporters were typing furiously, trying to keep up. Some Western diplomats shifted uncomfortably, others bowed their heads slightly, a rare gesture of respect. When he finished, there was a brief, heavy pause before applause broke out. It wasn't loud, but it was sincere, and it came from unexpected places, South America, the Middle East, even a few European delegates. AOC sat frozen, her earlier mockery echoing back at her. You're just a soldier. But soldiers, she realized, build nations when politicians lose their courage. By the evening, the confrontation had evolved into a political earthquake. News networks ran split screens, Traoré's calm defiance on one side, AOC's frozen expression on the other. Analysts called it the moment Africa spoke for itself. Even conservative American outlets, usually hostile toward both, admitted the African leader had outclassed one of Washington's sharpest voices. AOC appeared later that night on CNN, her posture tight, her tone defensive. I don't regret challenging him, she said. But rhetoric won't fix global inequality. Burkina Faso's government should focus on democracy, not defiance. The interviewer hesitated. But, Congresswoman, he asked, some say his words resonated because they revealed truths Western politicians refuse to confront. That maybe, we don't treat Africa as an equal. Her lips tightened. I think people are romanticizing revolutionaries again, she said. They always do, until reality hits. But outside, reality had already changed. On social media, African creators flooded timelines with clips of Traoré's speech, edited with thunderous music and subtitles that read. He spoke for every silenced voice. They mocked him, he educated them. Even in Western cities, protests echoed the sentiment. Young African Americans held signs reading, "We are not your soldiers. We are Traoré's generation." Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, the streets of Ouagadougou glowed with torches and cell phones. People sang patriotic songs deep into the night. Vendors sold t-shirts that read, "Just talk. No, just truth." Through it all, Traoré remained silent. No interviews. No social media posts. His advisors urged him to respond to AOC's remarks, but he refused. Let them talk, he said. I lead by doing. His silence became louder than any speech. Every news outlet wanted to know what he'd say next, and by not speaking, he forced them all to listen harder. The young soldier from a landlocked nation had done what few world leaders could: he made the powerful wait. In Washington, strategists argued over how to handle him. "He's dangerous," one State Department analyst said. "Not because of weapons, because of ideas." And while AOC tried to regain her footing, the world was already moving toward the story's next act, an unexpected invitation that would put them face to face once more, not in debate, but in confrontation. 3 days later, an invitation arrived at the Burkinabe embassy in New York, embossed, formal, and unexpected. The seal of the U.S. Congress gleamed at the top. Inside, the message was short. The Congressional Committee on Global Partnerships cordially invites President Ibrahim Traoré to a private dialogue with Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to discuss the future of African-American cooperation. It was diplomacy's way of saying damage control. When Traoré read it, he smiled faintly. "So now," he murmured, "the ones who mocked, wish to meet." His security chief frowned. "Sir, it could be a trap, a media ambush." Traoré shook his head. "No, it's an opportunity. They attacked with words. I will answer with truth." The following afternoon, the private meeting took place in a sleek Manhattan conference suite, overlooking the Hudson River. The atmosphere was cold and cautious: mahogany table, glass water pitchers, and a dozen American aides with iPads poised like weapons. AOC entered, sharp in a navy suit, her expression polite but strained. "Mr. Traoré," she said, extending a hand, "thank you for coming." He shook it firmly. "You invited me. I respect courage, even when it's late." For a moment, neither spoke. Cameras weren't allowed, but everyone in the room felt the same pressure, two worlds colliding again, this time without microphones. "Let me be clear," AOC began, her tone controlled. "We share values. But your rhetoric is creating tension between our nations. You've turned social media into a battlefield." Traoré leaned back, calm as stone. "Madam, I didn't start a war. I just stopped bowing." She hesitated, caught off guard. "Then what do you want?" His reply came like a blade, quiet, sharp, irreversible. "Respect. Not loans, not lectures. Respect for our land, our people, and our choices." Her jaw tightened. "That sounds like defiance." Traoré smiled. "No. That sounds like freedom." Outside, journalists speculated feverishly about what was happening inside the room. Inside, for the first time, AOC's tone softened. Beneath her political armor, she recognized something rare: a man who wasn't performing for power, but embodying it. When they parted, she said quietly, "You really believe you can change the system?" Traoré paused at the door, looked back, and said, "No, Congresswoman. I believe I can end it, and rebuild something better." When the meeting ended, AOC remained in the room long after Traoré had left. The glass windows reflected her face, thoughtful, uncertain, stripped of the confidence that once defined her. For the first time in years, she felt small. Not because of defeat, but because she had faced someone who didn't fit into her world's logic, a man who couldn't be manipulated by fame, polls, or headlines. Her aides entered quietly. "Congresswoman, should we issue a statement?" one asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "No. Let the silence speak for now." But Washington didn't stay silent. Within hours, the story broke: AOC and Traoré hold private summit in New York. Every outlet ran with it. Commentators debated whether it was a reconciliation or a showdown. Conservative voices mocked AOC for giving a stage to an African nationalist. Progressive circles praised Traoré as the conscience the West lost. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, crowds gathered around outdoor screens showing clips of the two shaking hands. The image went viral with captions like, "The soldier made the system listen." When truth walks into the room, power has no choice but to sit down. Back in Washington, the mood was different. The White House requested a confidential report on Traoré's growing influence. One senior advisor put it bluntly: he's unifying Africa faster than we can react. For AOC, the noise was overwhelming. Every question from the press, every think piece, every late-night joke circled around the same point: who really won that meeting? That night, she stood in her office overlooking the Capitol. Her phone buzzed with messages, but she ignored them. Instead, she replayed his words in her mind. "I didn't start a war. I just stopped bowing." They echoed in a way speeches never did. There was no arrogance in his tone, just conviction. And for someone like AOC, who had built her identity on challenging systems, the irony was almost painful. He had done what she claimed to do, but without permission, without privilege, without apology. Meanwhile, Traoré boarded his flight back to Burkina Faso, the skyline of Manhattan fading behind him. One of his advisors asked quietly, "Do you think she understood you?" Traoré gazed out the window, the city lights glimmering below like dying stars. "Maybe not today," he said. "But one day, even they will see that freedom doesn't ask for recognition, it takes it." As the plane ascended into the clouds, the headlines multiplied. AOC outspoken, Traoré unshaken. The soldier who silenced the system. The world was shifting, and he knew it was only the beginning. When Ibrahim Traoré's plane landed in Ouagadougou, the city was no longer just a capital, it was a heartbeat. The runway was flooded with people waving Burkinabe flags, drums echoing across the airstrip, chants rising like thunder. Africa stands. Traoré leads. Cameras caught the moment he stepped off the plane, calm, composed, his military jacket dusted with desert wind. But his eyes softened when he saw the crowd. This wasn't about politics anymore, it was about pride reclaimed. He raised his hand once, and the crowd fell into a respectful hush. "I didn't go to New York to beg," he said through a microphone that barely carried over the sea of voices. "I went to remind them that Africa is awake, and we will never kneel again." The cheers that followed could have shaken the clouds. Across the Atlantic, AOC sat in her Washington apartment, watching the broadcast on her tablet. She had intended only to take a glance, but she couldn't look away. The image of thousands chanting Traoré's name haunted her, not out of jealousy, but realization. This wasn't the arrogance of a demagogue, it was the birth of something she had only theorized: real liberation. One of her aides entered. "Congresswoman, the party wants you to clarify your position on Traoré's movement." She sighed, pausing the video. "What do they want me to say? That freedom scares us?" Her aide hesitated. "They want you to remind people that democracy has to be guided." She laughed bitterly. "Guided by who? The same ones who wrote the rules to keep others out?" For the first time, AOC's rhetoric faltered. She realized her speeches, sharp, idealistic, passionate, had never risked anything. Traoré, on the other hand, risked everything. He didn't debate freedom. He lived it. Meanwhile, Traoré's convoy rolled through the streets of Ouagadougou. Women threw flowers from balconies, young people waved handmade signs reading, "He faced them, for us." His advisors tried to keep the schedule, but the crowd's love was unstoppable. That night, standing on the balcony of the presidential palace, Traoré looked over the city's glowing lights. His aide asked, was it worth confronting her? He smiled faintly. "I didn't confront her," he said. "I confronted the idea that Africa must always ask permission." And somewhere in Washington, AOC whispered to herself, he might just be right. Weeks passed, but the echoes of Traoré's speech and the charged meeting in New York refused to fade. Across the globe, headlines still whispered his name. His words, "We will never kneel again," had become a rallying cry, translated into dozens of languages. Meanwhile, in Washington, AOC's silence was beginning to make waves of its own. Reporters grew suspicious. Her usual social media energy had dimmed, and political commentators wondered if the encounter with Traoré had shaken her confidence. But the truth was more complex. she hadn't been silenced. She was thinking. One night, she met quietly with her most trusted advisor at a dim cafe near the Potomac River. The rain tapped against the window as she leaned in and whispered, "I want to go to Burkina Faso." Her aide almost dropped his cup. "Congresswoman, that's impossible. The optics alone." "I'm not going as a politician," she interrupted. "I'm going as a human being. I need to see what he's building." The plan was drawn in secrecy. No public announcement, no press detail. But secrets rarely last in a world fueled by leaks and algorithms. Within 48 hours, an anonymous source tipped off Reuters. AOC plans private visit to meet President Traoré. The news exploded online. Some praised her courage, others accused her of legitimizing an anti-Western populist. The White House released a careful statement: Representative Ocasio-Cortez travels are private and not reflective of U.S. policy. In Ouagadougou, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Crowds speculated whether she was coming to apologize, to negotiate, or to understand. When Traoré's aides told him the news, he didn't seem surprised. "She's coming to listen," he said simply. That evening, he met with local youth leaders. If she wants to see Africa, he told them, let her see it, not through speeches or cameras, but through our strength. By the time AOC's jet touched down on African soil, the world was watching again. From rooftops to market stalls, whispers rippled through the city: the woman who mocked him, came to meet him. And for the first time, the cameras didn't chase conflict. They captured curiosity, two minds from opposite worlds, about to face each other not as enemies, but as equals standing on African ground. The air in Ouagadougou shimmered with tension the morning AOC arrived. The sun had barely risen, yet thousands had already gathered near the presidential compound, their chants rolling like waves. Traoré. Africa stands. No chains, no masters. A convoy of black SUVs appeared in the distance, escorted by Burkinabe security. When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepped out, dressed modestly in neutral colors, the crowd fell silent, not out of fear, but out of awe. It was as if they were watching history correct itself. Traoré waited at the entrance of the palace, arms crossed behind his back, posture straight and unyielding. When she approached, he didn't smile immediately, only nodded. "Welcome to Africa, Congresswoman," he said. His tone carried neither warmth nor hostility, just truth. She met his gaze. "Thank you for receiving me." They walked together through the palace gardens, cameras kept at a respectful distance. For minutes, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, but not empty. It was the kind of silence that forced understanding. Finally, AOC broke it. "When I saw your people celebrate, I realized something. I speak about empowerment, but you live it." Traoré turned to her. "Empowerment isn't a word," he said softly. "It's a price. We paid it with years of hunger, blood, and humiliation. Now, we pay it forward." They stopped near a marble monument, names etched into it, honoring martyrs of Burkina Faso's independence. AOC ran her fingers over the carved letters. "I thought I knew struggle," she whispered. "But I never had to fight for my land." "You fought for your voice," Traoré replied. "That's the same war, just a different battlefield." The tension that had once defined them began to fade. For the first time, she saw not a rival, but a mirror, a reminder of what conviction looked like when it wasn't filtered through politics. "I didn't come to apologize," AOC said finally. "I came to understand." Traoré smiled faintly. "Then you've already done more than most." As they returned to the main hall, the crowd outside erupted again, chanting his name, and then, unexpectedly, hers. Two worlds, once divided by pride, now stood side by side. And somewhere deep down, both knew, this meeting was more than symbolic. It was the start of something neither empire nor ideology could stop. By dawn the next day, every major network in the world had one headline. Traoré and Ocasio-Cortez meet in Burkina Faso, the photo seen around the world. The image of the two leaders, one in his military uniform, the other in a simple beige dress, standing together under the blazing Sahel sun spread like wildfire. It wasn't posed. It wasn't political. It was powerful. In Washington, news anchors stumbled over how to interpret it. Some framed it as a symbol of global dialogue. Others accused AOC of legitimizing anti-Western rhetoric. But no one could deny what everyone felt: the ground had shifted. At the United Nations, diplomats whispered nervously. The African bloc, long dismissed as fractured, now spoke with a new kind of unity, and all of them cited Traoré as the spark. The West had underestimated him, treating him like a loud rebel. But he had become something far more dangerous, a voice people believed in. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, the streets were alive with celebration. Murals of the meeting appeared overnight, spray-painted portraits of AOC and Traoré beneath the words, "Truth has no borders." In a televised address that evening, Traoré faced the nation. The crowd outside the palace filled every street, their chants rising into the night. He began slowly, his voice low but unwavering. "They told us freedom was a gift," he said. "But freedom is not given. It is earned. And today, the world has seen that Africa's voice is not a whisper anymore, it's a roar." He paused, letting the applause thunder before continuing. "To those who still think we bow to the West, look again. Even their leaders are beginning to listen, not because we asked, but because we stood." The roar that followed shook the capital. Back in New York, AOC watched his speech from her office, tears forming quietly in her eyes. She didn't agree with everything he said, but she felt something she hadn't in years: conviction. She whispered, almost to herself, maybe the system we built needed to be challenged after all. As the broadcast ended, Traoré looked at the Burkinabe flag fluttering above the palace, red, green, and gold under a blood-orange sky. He turned to his aides and said, "We didn't change the world tonight. But we reminded it who it belongs to." The screen faded to black, the chants echoing in the distance. Africa rises. Traoré leads.